The First Crusade began to depart for the east in August 1096, with the blessing of Pope Urban II. Among the great lords marching at the heads of their armies was Godfrey of Bouillon, the powerful Duke of Lower Lorraine, driven by his deep piety to rescue Jerusalem. Bohemond, a giant red-headed Norman, left southern Italy with a small but experienced force. The wealthiest man to take the cross was Raymond IV, Count of Toulouse, richer than the King of France, and leader of a vast host of southern French knights. The Crusaders converged on Constantinople, where they swore an oath to Alexius Comnenus to return any lands they captured from the Muslims to his empire. In exchange, the Crusaders were to receive military and provisional support from the Byzantines. Accompanied by a small Byzantine detachment under the general Tatikios, the Crusaders crossed the Bosporus into Asia Minor, where, in 1097, they besieged Turkish-occupied Nicaea, the city from whence was born the famous creed of the Christian faith. After defeating a Turkish relief force led by Kili Arslan, the Crusaders attacked the city with mangonels and a siege tower built by Count Raymond. A month later, the Turks surrendered, and Byzantine flags flew once more over Nicaea's walls. The Crusaders continued eastward, across the desolate plains of Asia Minor, hampered by the brutal heat of the sun. Bohemond's army marched ahead of Godfrey's and Raymond's, and by July, the Norman host had reached the ruins of Dorylaeum. Suddenly, Kili Arslan, who had been tracking Bohemond, attacked the Normans with his swift Turkish mounted archers. At first, the Crusaders suffered serious losses, but Bohemond ordered his men to dismount and form a protective encirclement around their horses and baggage. As a result, the light Turkish cavalry could no longer do them much damage. Suddenly, the armies of Raymond and Godfrey appeared and charged, crushing and scattering the Turks. The Crusaders now entered Syria and marched south. By October, they'd arrived before Antioch, the largest city in the Mediterranean world at that time, aside from Constantinople. Part of Antioch's walls hugged the treacherous Mount Silpius, and the sheer size of the city made it impossible for the army to fully surround it. Although they'd hoped to move on to Jerusalem in a few weeks, the Crusaders were detained by the siege through the winter, which brought hunger to the Latin camp. By the opening months of 1098, the Crusaders were no closer to entering Antioch, and desertions became rampant. Tatikios withdrew the Byzantine contingent, promising to return with reinforcements. By May, still no Byzantine army had arrived, but news reached the Crusaders that Kerbuga, a powerful Turkish emir from Baghdad, was on his way with a massive army ready to crush the Christian besiegers. It was at this point that Bohemond, who spoke fluent Greek, established contact with an Armenian guard named Firuz on one of the towers on Antioch's walls. Firuz agreed to betray his tower to Bohemond. On the night of June 2nd, Bohemond moved a force before Firuz's tower under cover of darkness. Quickly seizing control of that section of the wall, Bohemond threw open a city gate to the army. The Crusaders poured into Antioch, slaughtering every Muslim they could find. By morning, they controlled the city. Only 2 days later, Kerbuga's host arrived and surrounded the city. Antioch was depleted of supplies. The Crusaders now faced starvation due to Kerbuga's blockade. However, on June 15, Peter Bartholomew, a priest in the following of Raymond of Toulouse, discovered in the Cathedral of St. Peter what he believed to be the holy lance that had pierced the side of Christ. This restored the confidence of the army. On June 28th, the Crusaders emerged from the city in battle formation. Bohemond led a cavalry charge that smashed a crucial portion of Kerbuga's troops. The Muslim army broke and fled. The Crusaders had triumphed. With Antioch secure, the bulk of the army was eager to move on to Jerusalem. But there was controversy over the fate of the city. Count Raymond insisted it be handed over to Emperor Alexius, but Bohemond pointed out that the Byzantines had abandoned them, and urged the Crusaders to put Antioch under his own control. Finally, in January 1099, the Crusaders set out south down the Syrian coastline toward Jerusalem, under the command of Count Raymond, leaving Bohemond in control of Antioch with a Norman garrison. By June 7, the Crusaders arrived at Jerusalem, now accompanied by the army of Godfrey of Bouillon. The city was under the control of Fatimid Egypt, and the Egyptian garrison had stockpiled the city for a long siege. The Crusaders made a couple of failed assaults, but managed to build several siege machines using timber from Genoese ships that had arrived at the port of Jaffa. Finally, on July 15th, the Crusaders broke through the walls. Godfrey of Bouillon and a group of his knights were the first to enter the city. Many of the city's Muslims were put to the sword. The Fatimid garrison commanders took refuge in the Tower of David, where they received a safe conduct from Count Raymond, whose troops escorted them safely out of the city. The armies of Godfrey and Raymond next marched south on the Egyptian fortress of Ascalon, where they defeated a Fatimid relieving force intent on contesting the Christian capture of Jerusalem. The crusade had triumphed. The army thanked God at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which contained the tomb of Christ. Godfrey of Bouillon was elected first ruler of the newly established Latin kingdom of Jerusalem, but he refused to take the title king in a city where Christ had been crucified, preferring instead to be called defender of the Holy Sepulchre.